Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating topic. We're going to unpack exactly how educational systems actually measure language skills, and how we're shifting from rigid, old school memorization to understanding true, dynamic communication. Think about it. If you've ever sat in an agonizingly quiet exam hall, staring at a multiple choice paper, and thought to yourself, wait, does filling in bubble C really prove I can speak this language? Well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're decoding the very DNA of language tests. We're going to use our source material to see exactly what these tests measure, how they measure it, and, crucially, where they totally fall short. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. To build a really solid mental matrix of how language testing works, we are going to cover 5 major paradigms: purpose-based, method-based, scoring-based, interpretation-based, and finally, alternative assessments. Let's jump right in. Starting off with number 1, purpose-based tests. Basically, this just asks, why are we even testing you in the first place? Now, you're probably super familiar with this first one from your own school days. The crucial point here is that achievement tests are directly anchored to a specific curriculum. It's what educators call constructive alignment between teaching and assessment. Basically, they look backward at what you were just taught. Traditional behaviorist scholars viewed learning as acquiring strictly observable knowledge, and these tests are designed to systematically measure exactly that. If it was in the syllabus, it's on the test. Simple as that. But here is where it gets really interesting, because there's often this massive, stark gap between passing a test and actually being able to communicate. As our source material highlights, in places like Bangladesh, students often achieve incredibly high grades in written English examinations, like the SSC or HSC, but then they completely struggle to hold a conversation in the language. It creates this fascinating and honestly frustrating disconnect between academic achievement and practical, real-world language use. You can memorize your way to an A, but you can't memorize your way through a real conversation. So unlike achievement tests, proficiency testing relies on this idea of communicative competence. It aims to see if you can actually survive and function in specific academic or professional contexts. And here's the kicker. It does not matter if you learned the language sitting in a classroom for 10 years or if you just picked it up by watching movies and chatting with locals online. This test only cares about your practical ability to use the language in authentic settings, right now. We're talking about the heavy hitters here, like IELTS and TOEFL. And while they provide a really comprehensive global picture of a learner's abilities, let's look at the trade-offs. We have to remember that language is highly context-dependent, which makes boiling it down to a single definitive score really tricky. As researcher Tim McNamara argues, proficiency is a socially situated construct. It's not just some fixed cognitive ability in your brain. Plus, standardized norms very often reflect native speaker expectations. This can unintentionally bake cultural biases right into the test, which frankly disadvantages some truly brilliant multilingual learners. Now, beyond achievement and proficiency, there are 3 other crucial purpose-based tests that focus on a student's starting line, rather than their finish line. Diagnostic tests act a lot like a medical scan. They pinpoint specific weaknesses so teachers know exactly what to remedy. Then you have placement tests, which are essentially the Goldilocks tests. They make sure you aren't bored to tears in a beginner class or totally overwhelmed in an advanced one. And aptitude tests? These are entirely predictive. They look at underlying cognitive abilities, like phonetic coding, to actually guess how well you might learn a new language in the future. Though, a quick aside, keep in mind that a student's motivation often predicts success just as strongly as raw aptitude. Moving right along to category number 2, method-based tests. This is all about the actual mechanics of measurement. So there's this really deep tension in language testing between authenticity and precision. Direct tests give us wonderful, authentic communication data. If I want to know if you can speak, a direct test literally just asks you to speak. It's a role play or an interview. An indirect test, however, offers psychometric precision and super easy administration. It might ask you to fill in a blank in a grammar sentence on a piece of paper, and then the testers infer that you can speak based on that grammar knowledge. Direct tests align beautifully with the real world, but they're expensive and take a ton of time. Indirect tests are cheap and highly reliable, but they often just measure what you know about the language rather than your ability to actually use it. All right, on to number 3, scoring-based tests. What happens to a test when we try to remove the human element? This is the classic battle between objective and subjective testing. Objective tests emerged from the psychometric traditions of the mid-20th century. They guarantee fairness across massive populations through fixed answers. They're fast, highly reliable, and score bias is basically zero because a machine can grade it. But communicative language teaching shifted our attention to authentic language use. And let's be real, true language use is wildly creative. It simply cannot be captured in a multiple-choice bubble. That's why subjective tests are absolutely vital. They require trained human examiners to judge complex, nuanced responses. It allows learners to genuinely express meaning, even if it does introduce the risk of human variance into the grading process. Okay, that brings us to number 4, interpretation-based tests. Basically, when you get your score, who are you actually competing against? Here we find a really profound contrast between grading on a competitive curve versus modern educational philosophies that prioritize absolute mastery. Norm reference tests are all about ranking. If you score in the 90th percentile, great, but that just means you did better than 90% of the people in the room. It actually doesn't tell us exactly what language skills you possess. Criterion reference testing, on the other hand, evaluates what you can actually do with the language in relation to clearly defined objectives. Think of the CEFR proficiency scales. It provides incredibly meaningful feedback for the learner, even though, admittedly, setting those absolute standards can be quite difficult for educators. Finally, we reach number 5, alternative assessments. This represents a massive learner-centered shift in education. Alternative assessments essentially capture the constructivist dream. We're talking about assessing language as an ongoing, living process, rather than just a high-stress, single snapshot in time on exam day. Portfolio assessment curates a longitudinal view of a learner's effort and progress over months, using reading journals, creative writing, and self-assessments. Performance-based assessments ask learners to step into real-world simulations, like debates or problem-solving discussions. Both of these approaches are incredibly authentic, and they massively promote learner autonomy. Though, as you can probably guess, they are naturally a total nightmare for administrators trying to standardize evaluation. Now, this is where it gets really cool. What's truly innovative here is dynamic assessment. It's based on Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, and it completely shatters the wall between testing and teaching. How? By actually offering help during the test to measure a student's future potential. Traditional tests only look at what you can do alone right now. But dynamic assessment looks at what Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development. It measures what you can achieve today with just a little bit of guidance. The examiner actively interacts with the learner, providing hints or prompts when they get stuck, and then observes how they respond to that support. It is a profoundly developmental and empathetic approach to testing. So, taking a step back, the crucial takeaway that echoes through all 5 of these categories is that no single test can do it all. A truly effective educational system requires a carefully balanced integration of multiple testing approaches. Achievement tests give us curricular accountability, direct tests give us authenticity, and alternative assessments capture long-term organic growth. We need all of these tools in our educational toolbox if we want to ensure validity, fairness, and true educational usefulness. And ultimately, tests don't just evaluate technical quality. They have massive social consequences. We have to move toward inclusive assessments that recognize rich, multilingual repertoires rather than just defaulting to dominant language varieties. Language assessment doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It happens in diverse, messy, beautiful societies. And traditional monolingual psychometric models often completely fail to capture the full communicative abilities of learners who engage in translanguaging practices. Like, for example, blending Bangla and English seamlessly in everyday life. We need tests that reflect how people actually speak. As Ilana Shomi pointed out, tests are powerful instruments that affect individuals, educational systems, and societies. Since language testing shapes so much of our academic and professional futures, we have to ask ourselves a vital question. How can we ensure the test we choose actually empower learners, rather than just slapping a label on them? Every test we design reflects our broader assumptions about language, about learning, and about what we truly value as a society. I really hope this roadmap has helped you navigate the wild and fascinating taxonomy of language testing. Keep questioning the metrics, keep learning, and I'll see you in our next explainer.